Welcome to the art and science of complex sales. This is the Leadership Quarter. This is a podcast for revenue, sales, and go-to-market leaders and practitioners that is focused on bringing you insights from the best and brightest the world has to offer. The Leadership Quarter is focused on asking the critical questions. How do we develop and empower sales leaders to build strong cultures and teams to hit our growth goals? Experts from around the world give their experiences and opinions on this critical aspect of sales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. And let's dive into introducing today's guests. Today, we're welcoming back author, professor, business owner, and overall sales guru, Frank Cespedes. A Harvard business professor and author of the recent book, Sales Management That Works: How to Sell in a World That Never Stops Changing, we dive in with Frank on a variety of sales leadership topics. We chat on AI, the impact it is having on sales leadership, the importance of leaders being able to focus on return on talent, how to get things done through others, and much, much more. Let's get started on this wisdom download from Frank.
Frank the Cespedes, how the heck are you?
Very, very good, Paul. It's good to see you. Thank you once again for inviting me to your podcast.
Well, it's wonderful to have you back. Last time we had an amazing episode, and I continue to learn so much from your writings and everything that's out there. The world wants to know, what has Frank been doing in the past year?
Well, it hasn't been earth-shaking. I'm a year older. That amazed me. But a grandchild. Life is good. I don't have complaints.
A grandchild? First, second, third?
It is the second. You know, you're too young to appreciate this, but it is as good as everybody tells you it is. It's what I call, having a grandchild is what I call ROI without the I. You know, you go home at the end, it's fabulous.
That's fantastic. Yeah, my parents live literally like a quarter mile from us.
Oh,
and
God
so my three get to go over and be grandchildren all the time, and it is one of the greatest blessings I've ever had.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, little boy, little girl, do you know, like
boy and girl. So we've got both bases covered.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is super cool. Well, I am today. Our podcast, we're going to move from leading a family to leading sales. That's where we're headed today, and found a lot of interest in this topic, and really just exploring it with you is going to be fantastic. I know you've done a lot of writing on it, a lot of study on this, and the first question I want to start with is really, let's define sales leadership. Like there's different things that you have to do in sales leadership, but from your perspective, when you're working with companies and you say your sales leaders have to be doing, what is that?
Yeah. Well, let me begin with what I mean by leadership, because, you know, that's one of those phrases in business that's very elastic, very fungible, and especially in the last 15 years. And I believe business schools like mine have contributed to this inflation and confusion. Mm-hmm. What I do not mean by leadership is many of the things people have read about in the last 15, 20 years. You know, a leader is charismatic, transformational, I don't know, separated at birth from Steve Jobs or something like that. By a leader, I mean someone who, out of necessity, has to get things done through others, right? Otherwise, you're only as good as your arms can reach. Doesn't matter what your title is. I guarantee you there will only be 24 hours in the day and 7 days in the week. So in that sense, I don't think there's a big difference between good managers and good leaders, especially in sales. Sales leadership certainly includes coaching. It's fundamental, and we can talk about that and what that requires. But it's also about resource allocation from an enterprise point of view, resource allocation that drives the value of the enterprise, not just top line revenue. And that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. I think that's one of the reasons that quite rightly what you're focusing on is leadership and finding there's lots of attention. Higher interest rates, the data revolution, a whole variety of things are really changing what it means to be a good sales manager and sales leader. But by leadership, I mean the ability to get things done through others and leverage contribution in that sense.
So in one of your recent articles, you talked about this concept of return on talent and how that it's critical that everybody at that sales leadership or management position achieve a return on talent. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what I'm talking about is what I think remains, even in the age of AI and other things, a fundamental fact about sales. It's about people, right? And so return on talent has to do with what you do or don't do in hiring, with what you do or don't do in training and development. I always quote and remember one of the things I'm grateful to Harvard Business School for is they force us to write case studies. And that's good because, trust me, you don't learn about how business really works in graduate school. You've got to be out there. And I always remember something that a senior executive said to me during one of the very first case studies I ever wrote. I probably still smelled like a graduate student at that point. And I was asking him about the people aspects of what he was doing, talent. And he said, Frank, watch what you're going to find in your career. You're going to find that many companies invest more and more time in keeping their equipment up to date than their people. And he went on to say, ultimately, you'll get what you don't invest in. And that is certainly true in sales. So it's about hiring. It's about training and development. It's about performance management and coaching. All of that increasing productivity, accelerating ramp-up time. All of those basics are what I mean by return on talent. And it is what managers and leaders get paid for.
One of the interesting things that I've seen in my journey in the space for, say I'm young, but it's been over 20 years now, is this, it was a shift, and I think we're starting to see a shift back. And let's see if I can say this correctly, but a shift away actually from looking to that true return on talent, and instead looking at towards the efficiency of talent and what I can do to drive tool sets and everything to make people robots, make them do the same job at the same level, in sales, that production and assembly line. And then I think what we're seeing now, what's really interesting in this world where AI is coming out, I'm hearing more and more and more people focus and talk about that idea of we need to lift people up. The people are the ones that make the difference. I don't know if you've seen a similar thing, but it's just something I've noticed as we went from this idea of we can make all salespeople the same and just get them into a system, to which you need a system, you need the tool sets, you need all of that. But there was more of a focus on what is the system, what is the technology. And today I'm starting to hear how do we enable the people? How do we make them better? Are you following that?
I mean, I think in broad terms, you're exactly right, Paul. I mean, where did the, standardized, routinized, salesperson has one more cog in the machine come from? Fundamentally, I think it came from that 10 to 15 year period of what we now realize were basically negative real interest rates, all the investment in SaaS sales models, where the issue really wasn't making money. Most of them, the vast majority of those firms, have not made a dime in the bottom line, but where, because of data and the technology, you could routinize the tasks and all those metrics that people bragged about. The catchphrase, predictable revenue. I always love that phrase, predictable revenue, right? Revenue is generated by the customer and the market. It's not predictable in that sense. The reign of higher interest rates, which is not going to be short, I think has changed that. You see it in the so-called SaaS crash, but you see it in lots of other areas. And I think what lots of companies have realized is that the hype about salespeople and relationships and all of that going away was hype, right? I mean, you've heard me quote these figures before, but what is e-commerce as a percentage of total retail sales in the United States? It's about 15%, and that's after the pandemic. So, it is not a digital eats physical world. But at the same time, what technology has done is, in fact, routinize and take away a lot of those routine tasks. And the result, I think, in sales is that, and this is what you should expect in a progressive, competitive economy, the bar for sales talent and sales tasks has risen inevitably. I mean, the days of salespeople basically being walking, talking product literature, those are long gone, right? I mean, customers get that with one or two clicks. Salespeople have got to add value, and it is about the people at that point, precisely because so much of those other tasks have gone the way of technology. So I agree with you about, the big curve. I think it was generated by certain macroeconomic conditions. And, in retrospect, you can call it a bubble. But again, I think that's come back. The circuit has swung around.
When you talk about, and I'm maybe it's because I'm preaching this that I'm hearing it more. So it quite honestly could be. But one of the things that about this being able to go in and allocate the resource, being able to make your team be the best they possibly can. In one of your recent articles, I think it's back from April and May 2019, but is a focus on that sales leader being able to actually manage them, lead themselves, and not just be the numbers guy, not just be the guy that can, look at all the pieces, parts, and but actually focus on driving that responsibility in themselves throughout the team. When you start to look at sales teams out there and you look at a wide range, what is the difference in that ability of sales leaders to lead themselves, and how does that correlate to the success of their sales teams?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, here I think we got to talk about the challenges that sales leaders face in doing that. And, I'd point to three big ones, Paul. The first one, and I already alluded to this, but that transition from individual contributor to manager, right? Now that we know this from 60 plus years of research about careers. That is a transition that anybody in business who wants to be a manager or a leader has to go through. But it's an especially difficult transition in sales. Why do so many people go into sales and stay in sales? Because if I make my numbers, they leave me alone. Most salespeople are the quintessential individual contributors. They spend years learning how to take care of themselves and their accounts. But once you become a manager, as I said earlier, you have to get things done through others. You got to learn to take care of others and allocate those resources. So that's number one. You've got to do that, and that is a change in professional identity and mindset. And many sales managers, despite the title, Paul, never make that transition. The single biggest complaint that I have heard throughout my career about sales leaders from their other C-suite colleagues, we promoted Charlie or Charlotte to become the sales leader because they were a great salesperson. They remain a great salesperson, but they don't lead, they don't manage. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is what the data revolution is doing in sales. And fundamentally what it's doing is making what used to be a black box. We're not really sure what goes on in sales, but if they meet their numbers every quarter, leave them alone. Those days of sales as a black box are quickly ending. It's much more transparent. And the function that's getting most of this data is the finance function. And finance people are annoying. Once they get data, they ask questions. And this is always my advice to any sales leader who's less than 50 years old. If you want to do professional development, your next professional development initiative shouldn't be the next course about selling or whatever. Make sure that your level of financial literacy goes beyond top line volume, that you can argue in the language of return on invested capital, et cetera, because that's how those arguments occur. So that's number two, the requirements for financial literacy. And then the third is we live in the vast majority of industries and product categories in an omni-channel buying world, not a digital eats physical world, but it is an omni-channel buying world. Customers in both consumer and B2B markets are online and offline multiple times. And at the end of the day, that requires a multi-channel response. And again, that's a big deal in sales because a sales leader these days not only has to manage their own people, the direct sales force, but they're usually managing some kind of series of channel partners and that ecosystem. Where do we use the digital technology for lead generation, et cetera? It is a much more complex job. But again, that's what you should expect when the bar is raised because of technological progress.
Well, so you speak to something there, the pace of innovation and the pace of the data revolution and the pace of everything has been occurring in the past 20 years has been really difficult for even the best of the best sales leaders to manage and to get people the most updated stuff. How do you see sales leaders responding to that? Like, okay, you got a great sales leader, you got a great, they're managing and leading themselves well, they're out in market, they're understanding what's happening with their customers, but there's so much more in terms of the profession that is going along as well, and that is improving and getting better and continually evolving. How do you see the best sales leaders reacting?
I go back to basics. My background is I was an academic, then I left, ran a business for 10 years and got lucky. And one of the things that impressed me in running a business was how much competitive advantage you could achieve simply by doing the basics better than your competitors. So I go back to the basics. And when it comes to the basics in the area that you're quite rightly asking about, Paul, I go to culture. You know that old phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast? Mm-hmm. It's not true. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. How do you create the right culture when sales cycles are getting longer, when time to cash is a bigger issue, et cetera? Well, it's about people, and with people, it starts with hiring, right? And this is an area, by the way, that is difficult in sales, much more difficult hiring in sales than it is in other areas for reasons, I'll explain, but also an area where many sales managers make it increasingly unnecessarily difficult. There are challenges in sales hiring that just don't exist to the same extent in most other areas of business. If you want to hire an engineer, you can go to a school. And again, it's like walking in a food court. What do you want? Electrical engineering, chemical engineering. You want to hire someone in finance, accounting. You can find people who majored in that subject. The same is true in computer programming, but not in sales. Of the 4,000 plus colleges and universities in America, last time I looked, which was about 4 years ago, less than 300 even offered a sales course, let alone a sales program. So most people start out in this line of work not knowing much about what they're going to get paid for. And managers make that job harder. They have an excessive reliance on unstructured interviews. And what I'm about to say is as close to an established fact as anything you'll ever hear from a business school professor. The correlation between the evaluations people get in their interviews and their subsequent on-the-job performance tends to vary from about 0.2 to 0.4. In other words, even in the best of circumstances, it's less than the 0.5 rate of flipping a coin. So it starts with hiring and getting much more purposeful about that beyond interviews. Sales and selling is ultimately about behaviors. It's not about how they smiled in the interview, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's training and development. And here I think technology actually can be a big help and a friend for sales leaders who know how salespeople develop. Most sales people develop, this is true of adult learning in general, but especially sales, they pay attention to information when they need it and where they need it, not weeks or months earlier or later in a training center. So what is called just-in-time learning is important here. Salespeople pay attention to information on their way to make a call or even during the sales conversation. Sales technology can help here. You can get them that information both narratively and visually through phones, iPads, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second big fact with training and development is the fact of peer learning and what the L&D people call modeling behavior. Most salespeople learn the most from watching the best of their peers in action. I watch you, Paul, and I say, wow, the way you dealt with that price objection, that was clever. I'm going to use that next time. The way you framed the value proposition, I hadn't thought of it that way. And again, this is an area where leadership, but also technology can help disseminate those best practices and create the culture you want. And then the third thing I would point to, it always amazes me, it's amazed me throughout my career, how this fundamental act of leadership is ignored. Performance reviews. They are probably the single most ignored tool for affecting behavior and culture, especially in sales. You know, busy sales managers do what I call drive-by reviews. And when they do that, they're not only perpetuating a culture of underperformance, they're inhibiting the flow of vital information. And you know this. The most important information about customers is often not in the CRM system. It's in the heads of the reps and account managers. And you only unlock that information through doing a good performance review. And that's a trainable skill. This is an aspect of leadership which is not metaphysics. You can train people to do good performance review. So I start with culture. Whenever you're talking about culture, it's people, hiring, really impactful training and development. And then thirdly, making sure that performance reviews are taken seriously and done well. That those, I think, are the way good sales leaders deal with the pace of change.
That is great advice. And I'm going to encourage everybody on this, if you've on the podcast, if you have a chance to bookmark areas of a podcast and that type of stuff, make sure that you put a pin in that and re-listen to it a couple of times. One of the things you said there, the just-in-time learning, really hit home to me. I'm thinking about, we have something that we call Role Play Nation. And it's so much fun. Like we get our team together and we have a board that we work off of, and people do rock, paper, scissors to get the the assessment or the questions and who they're going to be and all those things. The benefit of that is that just-in-time learning. There's two ways to do it. One, our system helps with that, but two, like the ability to come to something like that prepared and ready to ask questions and to be together and to hear not just the sales coach and sales manager and sales leader say that, but to have a culture of it. It's game changing. Like
I
instead
think
of
you're
being
right.
the sole, like if I was the CRO and the sole arbiter of how to sell well, right? That is a terrible way to lead, because it bottlenecks all information through me. So that just in time and that community and culture learning, great stuff there.
But I also think you're pointing to something important, in your role play nation, because among other things, what is a role play? A role play gets at actual behaviors, right? I mean, I guarantee it doesn't matter how good a leader you think you are, how talented you think your people are. Neither you nor they are mind readers. We communicate through language, behavior. That's what the role play unlocks. And again, technology is an area now, and you'll find there are lots of tools for this that can scale up those role plays. The manager doesn't have to be there for every one. So I think, it may not sound, like one of these grand disruptive things people talk about, but it may make more difference than most things people talk about as disruptive. So I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, and I love it. It's interesting when we get all the technology and all the things in. I guess that assist with things like role plays or like coaching, or like I always go back to, those are amazing, and it's going to take us into our next subject, but those are amazing additions to scale and do things more efficiently. But the first step is to figure out how to do them in the first place.
You got
right?
it. I
It's
think
how to
that
invest
is very
in the first
well
place.
put. Your listeners should listen to what you just said. I think that's exactly right.
Woohoo! I think that might be the first time that anybody said that to me on the podcast. Listeners, listen up. Well, hey, let's talk it into the next section, which is AI, because we have to talk about AI because everybody talks about AI, but we don't. But I want to talk about it specifically because I do see it as having an impact on sales leadership. And I don't think anybody knows exactly what it's going to be, but I think we have hints. And so what have you seen out there in terms of AI and how it's impacting and how people are using it?
Well, I mean, here's my take. And I've got a pretty good perch on this because there's a lot of research being done in academia. I'm on the board of a company that sells AI tools to sales forces, and I'm happy to tell you what I see there. But the first comment I want to make, what is, someone told me this is something called Amara's Law. I think his name was Roy Amara. He taught at Stanford. But he said that technologies are overestimated in the short term and their impact is underestimated in the long term. I think that's exactly right about AI. AI will not replace sales people. I think that's hype. But it can free up sales time. And that's a very, very big deal. If you look at the research about how much time do salespeople on average spend in customer contact, which I think we would agree is a pretty important part of sales. And by customer contact, by the way, I don't just mean making a pitch, on Zoom or in person. I mean all forms of customer contact through email, the webinar, demos, etc. The data varies by industry, but on average, across industries, salespeople only spend about 30 to 35% of their time in actual customer contact, right? Now, think about that. What if you can make that 40%, 45%, nirvana, 50% or more? Not only is that in most companies a huge productivity increase, it also increases the company's addressable market. Because segments, accounts that were infeasible now become economically feasible with better go-to-market utilization. And AI can, and I believe is helping here, right? We sort of automate the emails. Content marketing is made for generative chat GPT. And last but not least, when you do have a decent sales manager, you begin to offload all those administrative functions that have progressively sucked up more and more time from salespeople. So that's number one. And that would be my advice to our listeners. Forget the larger stuff you're hearing about AI. Where can you use it so that your reps can actually spend more time prospecting or upselling or cross-selling, whatever it is that's important in customer contact? But here I get back to the comment that I applauded of yours, 5 minutes ago. Artificial intelligence is no different than any other technology in terms of the basic rule for technology and business. Garbage in, garbage out, all right? If you look at what is the data that goes into many of these AI tools for companies, much of it comes from the CRM system, which is notoriously noisy data, not because of the software, but because of the inputs, right? Different salespeople basically call, they define a lead very different ways. They do lead qualification very different ways. As I mentioned earlier, I'm on the board of a company. We sell these tools to customers. And by the way, because of the hype about AI, business has been great for the last year. We were sort of putzing along, then ChatGPT comes along and suddenly, boom. Our funnel explodes, God bless. But here's what I noticed, the good news, and then I think something that you're going to hear more and more and more about in subsequent years. The good news is that if you look at what the AI can do for lead generation and lead qualification, it is usually, and by usually I mean about 75 to 80% of the time, much better at that than the current folk wisdom in the sales force. And the reason is that folk wisdom is tied to sales compensation plans, which mainly are driven by volume. And therefore, most sales managers don't have a big incentive to really get serious about lead qualification. Bring them in. If we sell any of them, let the other parts of the business worry about whether it's profitable or not. As I mentioned earlier, I think those days are going away. So what I noticed with the firm where I'm on the board, our clients almost always get a significant bump up in sales productivity when they buy our tools. Right? It just goes up. But then if you go back 18 to 24 months later, there's diminishing returns. And the reason is garbage in, garbage out. Basically, the data that's there. And essentially what these machine learning technologies do in their pattern searching, they double down on the data they have. Meanwhile, the market is doing whatever the market's going to do. And a year, 2 years later, that data is less relevant to what's really going on in the market. And again, that's one of the big changes I think you're going to hear about. And in traditional technology systems, deleting something is relatively straightforward. In AI, it's much more complex. So it's going to be a change in how people manage. But I do think it has a significant upside that many companies are already realizing in freeing up sales time. It can make a big difference in lead gen and lead qualification. But to get the sustained results, you've got to keep the data up to speed. That means you've got to manage differently. I get back to my previous comment about sales reviews, cleaning up the CRM system. If you look at the money the clients of this company I've mentioned spend, the actual AI tool is about this much. The rest of it has to do with them getting their data act together.
I have a friend that I just talked to 2 days ago. I had not even thought about that element of what the data would do, but for large scale CRM and ERP solutions, his new role is going to be implementing a solution relative to meta tagging and how that can translate to AI and all those things because of the data problem. The challenge that he said, and that I now understand that you're talking about, is it still won't ever be fast enough. Like it still won't ever be enough, right? To be able to, that's going to bring us a lot farther than we have been, but it won't ever completely close the gap between what the market is saying and what the people are doing in the CRM, unless you actually figure out a way to go out to market with the AI. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but
well, I mean, I would say this. I think I'd agree with the basic point you're making. It won't completely close the gap, but it can close the
it
gap
a lot,
more than it is now.
More than it is.
You know, look, advantage in business is always relative advantage. So if you can come up with something that's not perfect but better, do it. That's my advice to CEOs. If you wait for perfect, you're going to be dead.
And then I looked up, it is Amara's Law. So that's a really good thing for everybody to check out again on the pod if you look that up. Because you're right, we're seeing that directly today, and it's fascinating. Well, Frank, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure once again to have you on. Can you tell the audience how to find you if they're interested?
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I guess I'd invoke what I'll call the usual suspects. You know, there's LinkedIn. I teach at Harvard Business School. There's going to that website, the faculty pages. I do have a website, but I have to confess, Paul, I haven't been to my own website in over a year. I have no idea what the heck is there. You know, I just don't pay attention to it. So, and then, you know, there's I've written a number of books. The last two are published by Harvard Business Review Press. You can always go there, or Amazon. One book is called Aligning Strategy and Sales. The other is Sales Management That Works, which, by the way, cites some very good research from Membrane. So thank you for that. But those are the areas to look.
Well, Sales Management That Works, I think is my favorite of those two. I think it's a great read. I would highly encourage anybody that's listening to this. I think that it's applicable to now and forever. And I think it's one of those things, and I'm going to ask you to lead us out on this. If you were going to give somebody, a sales leader that's entering the market now, you know, your words of wisdom, pull from wherever you want. What is a timeless word of wisdom that you could bring, Frank Cespedes, timeless word of wisdom to a new sales leader coming out of the market right now?
I'm going to get back to where we began. That again, that transition in a career from individual contributor to manager is fundamental in sales. And you either want that or you don't. You either embrace the role of being a manager as opposed to, hey, I'm a super salesperson, or you don't. And if you don't embrace that role and then complain about it, you know, I just always quote that line in the gangster movies. Hey, you chose this life. So, you know, suck it up. But that would be my single biggest bit of advice to the new sales leader. Make sure you know what you're getting into and that you welcome that. You welcome all of the hassles that always come with having to get things done through talented but rambunctious human beings.
I love it. Talented, rambunctious. All you salespeople out there, that's who we are. And let's keep doing it. Frank, keep shining bright. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Everybody, please make sure you're reaching out to Frank. Make sure you're reading the books. Absolute fantastic person and great researcher in the world of sales. So I truly appreciate you coming on here. And with that, everybody, we'll say goodbye for today. Keep shining bright and have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Art and Science of Complex Sales. Please take a moment, like, subscribe, share this podcast on all your favorite platforms, and let's get the word out. This podcast is proud to be brought to you by Membrane.com. We are the world's top B2B sales platform. And in the world of B2B sales, with everything from prospecting to business acquisition to managing complex growth, Membrane has the right size technology for your sales team. Our latest innovation, the Coaching Cockpit, empowers your leaders, managers, and team with the information and tools they need to take their skills to the next level and to take advantage of the exponential power of effective sales coaching. With our technology and the top team of sales partners around the world, Membrane is helping to achieve our driving vision. This is, quite simply,
elevating the sales profession. To learn more, find us at www.membrain.com. That is membrain.com, or contact us via email at sales@membrain.com. Keep shining bright and have a wonderful day.